on the Sunday school website. I have a bad habit. Every time I read an outline and go back, I want to change it. When I add something, do those sorts of things. So I do that quite often. So Isaiah chapter 29, we'll read verses 1 and 2, and then we'll get started, okay? So verse 1, Woe, O Ariel, Ariel the city where David once camped. Add year to year, observe your feasts on schedule. Now bring distress to Ariel. And she will be a city of mourning and moaning, and she will be like an Ariel to me. Ariel is another name for the word Israel. It means the Lion of God. So last week when we were studying, we were looking at how God has brought us up to the place where we are up to Abraham. God creates, and then man falls, and man falls because of sin, right? Genesis chapter 2 and verse 17, God says, But from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil you shall not eat from it, for in the day that you eat from it you will surely die. So, of course, they're told not to eat of that tree of the knowledge of good and evil, and it's by that one man, Adam, that sin came into the world. Listen to Romans chapter 5 and verse 12, just to kind of get things going here. Therefore, just as through one man, that's the means by which sin entered. Therefore, just as through one man sin entered the world, and death through sin, so death passed upon all because all have sinned. Again, in chapter 6 and verse 23, we read much the same thing. The wages of sin is death, but the gift of God is eternal life through Jesus Christ our Lord. So death occurs because they violate God's warning. They don't lie, they don't cheat, they don't steal. They just question what God had told them and whether or not it was true. And so they take of the tree and they eat of that tree, and then eventually they will encounter physical death as well, which occurs after that. We're all, remember, born dead in our trespasses and sins. Ephesians chapter 2 and verse 1 and 5 say this, And you were dead in your trespasses and sins. Verse 5, even when we were dead in our transgressions. Just a couple of books over, pastors are doing Philemon. If you look at Colossians chapter 2 and verse 13, you see much the same thing. And you, being dead in your transgressions and the uncircumcision of your flesh, he made alive with him. You're dead. You're not sin sick. You're not sort of incapacitated. You didn't have a sort of free will to choose to go contrary to your nature. You were dead. I don't know about you, but probably none of you ladies did, but some of you guys probably when you were younger walked around and poked dead animals, threw stuff at dead animals, and nothing happened. They didn't move. There was no life in them. They couldn't act. They couldn't speak. They couldn't react to anything that you had done to them, and that's how we all are when we're born. We're born spiritually dead. Now, I don't know if you had noticed last week when we were talking about all the things that God had did in Genesis 1 up to Genesis 11, all the things that he was doing. But I don't know if you had noticed the thing that we didn't mention. Now, there's several numbers, and of course, I don't know the exact number. Some say 7 billion. Others say 20 million. Whether it was 20 million or whether it was 7 billion, in Genesis 6, what we find is that the wickedness of men is so bad upon the earth by this point that God says he's going to destroy the entire earth. And Yahweh saw that the evil of man was great on the earth, and every intent of the thoughts of his heart was only evil continually. So now, not only is man dead in his trespasses and sins, but he is his heart is bent on self-centeredness, on fulfilling his own desires and his own will, right? And so we see that. What is your thoughts on that? God taking the life of 20 million people, but because Noah finds grace in the eyes of the Lord, which is what we see in verse 8 of Genesis 6, Noah finds grace in the eyes of the Lord. 8 people are spared. Does that make you think different about who God is? Whether he's a God of love, whether he's a God of justice. Remember, all of his acts are righteous. So by killing those multitudes of people, that was actually a righteous thing that God had done. Well, not only that, but just think about this. That was an act of divine judgment. It happened upon all of those people, all the people that were on the earth. But not only that, when you get up into the Exodus, look at Exodus chapter 12, and we'll get to Abraham's call here. I just kind of want to stair-step you up there while people are still coming in. But Exodus chapter 12, verses maybe 12 to 14. Exodus 12, verses 12 to 14. He says this, "And I will go through the land of Egypt on that night, and I will strike down all the firstborn of the land of Egypt, both of man and beast, against all the gods of Egypt. I will execute my judgments. I am Yahweh. And the blood shall be a sign for you on the house where you are, and I will see the blood, and I'll pass over you. And there shall be no plague among you to destroy you when I strike the land of Egypt. Now this day will be a memorial to you, and you shall celebrate it as the feast of Yahweh. Throughout your generations, you are to celebrate it as a perpetual statute." So before they're even called out of, the land of Egypt there, that thing's dangerous. Before they're even called out of the land of Egypt, multitudes of firstborn are killed. Not to mention all those who were killed during those plagues. Think of all the plagues that occurred and all those people that God had brought to their end. He has killed millions in the flood. Now he's going to kill the firstborn. He's already killed multitudes in all of these different judgments upon Egypt and upon their gods. This is divine judgment that takes place not only here, but turn over just a chapter or two to chapter 14. And this is the rehearsal of those people who came up out of Egypt. Chapter 14, let's just read a couple verses in there. Verse 4. "Thus I will harden Pharaoh's heart with strength, and he will pursue them, and I'll be glorified through Pharaoh and his army, so that the Egyptians will know that I am Yahweh," and they did so. Do you notice that? God is going to bring them out, and Romans chapter 9 tells us that he preserves Pharaoh's life for this very occasion. He's going to bring them out so that all might know that he is Yahweh, right? That's the whole point and the whole focus of what he's doing. But he's going to do something else in regards to this. Verse 7 says that Pharaoh took 600 choice chariots of all the other chariots of Egypt with the officers that were over them. So just one or two people, all of those people that go and that pursue the Egyptians, or the children of Israel. Verses 13 and 14. "But Moses said to the people, 'Do not fear. Stand by, see the salvation of Yahweh, which he will accomplish for you today. For the Egyptians whom you have seen today, you will never see them again, ever.'" That's it. God has already killed millions of people. He's killed the firstborn, and now he's going to kill these people as well. We see in verses 13 and 14. Verse 18, "Then the Egyptians will know that I am Yahweh, when I am glorified through Pharaoh, through these chariots and this horseman." Again, the second time God says they will know that I am Yahweh. Verse 28, "And the waters returned and covered the chariots and the horsemen, even Pharaoh's entire army that had gone into the sea after them. Not even one of them remained." Not even one of them remained that followed the children of Israel. All of them that pursued Israel were terminated. "And Israel saw the hand which Yahweh had used against the Egyptians, and the people feared Yahweh, and they believed in Yahweh and in his servant Moses." So what we see is Yahweh's purpose coming to pass while Satan and his demons are influencing mankind to rebel against God's word. We see this in Isaiah chapter 46 and verse 10. In Isaiah chapter 46 and verse 10, verses 9 and 10 rather, we could read both. Isaiah 46, verses 9 and 10, we read this. Remember the former things long past, for I am God, there is no other. I am God, there is no one like me, declaring the end from the beginning, and from ancient times things which have not been done. This is what God is going to do. This is what God does do. In Proverbs chapter 21 and verse 30, Proverbs chapter 21 and verse 30, we read this. There is no wisdom, there is no discernment, and there is no counsel against Yahweh. Whatever God does is perfect and true and right because he is perfect and true and right. So all of his works are to be glorified. What is your thought on that? God kills millions of people and we're to glorify him. Yeah. He gave life to the people. Yeah. Yeah. Do you have Christian friends who would doubt that, who would dispute that God had killed those people? I mean, those judgments came from God. God established that ordering of the firstborn. God had told them to move out. God had allowed the Egyptians to follow them. God had drowned the Egyptians that followed them. That's all the righteous works of God, and we're to glorify him. Do you have a problem with that? What is your thinking on that? Out of how many millions of people? Yeah, Carrie? And so what Carrie's talking about is how God is omniscient. He's aware fully of all those things. If you don't have a place in your mind, where you allow God to take people's lives, then you have a real big problem. Yeah.
It's also a contrast for our salvation and the judgment on those who will reject it. It shows how immense our salvation really is, as you can contrast that.
And that's easy to say. Isn't that easy to say, though, for us? I mean, we're saved, right?
Right, but I understand the immenseness of God by that action of his judgment.
Yeah, and it was a righteous deed. All of God, remember, God is perfect. Everything that comes from him is perfect and just and right. So for God to kill millions of people is perfect and just and right. And that's what I'm asking you. Do you see a problem with that? Now, most of us would say, no, not really. I'm saved, so it's okay. Right? But don't you have friends and family who aren't? Right, Brian? And so Brian's thought is that we should all be even more thankful that we are saved, that we are those in the ark, right? Now we're talking about God inflicting judgment on those who are wicked. When we look at Cain, thinking about earlier, I'm trying to think of where we're at in history and put things before we have that call of Abraham. But thinking about Cain, I think about 1 John chapter 3 and verse 12, where it says, "Not as Cain, who was out of that evil one and slew his brother." Right? He's of the line of Satan. Right? All when we are born. Let me read that, John chapter 8, verse 44. I always make sure that I don't misquote that. John 8, verse 44 says, "But you are of your father, the devil." This is what he's telling the people there. You are of your father, the devil, and you want to do the desires of your father. He was a murderer, and he does not stand in the truth because there's no truth in him. So all you want to do is go around lying and killing. That's what kind of people you are. That's what he tells them, right? So the practical application is this. God is at work making himself known to you and I so that we can, in return, turn around and make God known to others. There are people in your life, there are people in my life that God has put in our life for us to be a witness to of God's grace. Colossians chapter 1, verse 28. "Him we proclaim, admonishing every man and teaching every man with all wisdom, so that we might present every man complete in Christ." And that's what we're doing, right? We're being affected by the Word of God so that we can reflect the glory of God, right? So, with that in mind, let's look at God's creation of Israel. Now remember, when we were looking beforehand, we have the mother-son cult that we looked at, and we saw how that has affected culture. This ought to be interesting, me trying to do that. Okay. We'll try it this way. Close enough. All right, good job. So, we have the mother and son cult worship, what? Semiramis and Tammuz, and we talked about them, how God was going to call Abraham to be the father of this new covenant people. Remember, the Tower of Babel falls. This mother-son cult worship is going on. It's going to infest and does infest all the world. So God sets his people off to the side so that he can use them to proclaim the message of the one true God. Listen to just one of the passages there in the book of Jeremiah, chapter 7 and verse 18. I wanted to read that to you. Just again, to have you be mindful of our hearts. Jeremiah chapter 7, speaking of this group of people, and verse 18. Jeremiah 7 and 18. "The children gather wood, and the fathers make the fire burn. The women knead dough and make cakes for the Queen of Heaven, and they pour out drink offerings to other gods." For what purpose? "In order to provoke me." I mean, think about that. This is God's people. These are God's people. They are doing this to provoke God to jealousy. Not only has it destroyed the whole earth, but now by this time, his own children are still provoking. You see. So let's look at the creation then of Israel, of Abraham. So look at Isaiah chapter 43, if you would. Isaiah 43. And we'll look at several passages. I don't know how far we'll get, but we'll try to keep the flow going here. Isaiah chapter 43, and we'll read several verses out of this chapter here. Right? Isaiah 43, verse 1. "But now thus saith Yahweh, your Creator, O Jacob, and he who formed you, O Israel." The word create, bara, is the same word you get in Genesis 1, and then the word yatsar, to form, means to squeeze into shape. God creates and forms Israel. Why? Because there's this mother-son cult worship going on, and he's going to bring his people unto himself, away from them, and he's going to give them the law, and he's going to give them the knowledge of who he is so that they can go and proclaim him to the other nations. Look at verse 7 then again. "Everyone who is called by my name and whom I have created for my glory, whom I have formed, even whom I have made. And again, he's talking about here, this is the Old Testament, he's talking about Israel. Verse 15, I am Yahweh, your Holy One, the Creator of Israel, your King. He creates Israel for himself. They are his special people. Isaiah chapter, just let me, I think there's another verse in Isaiah 66, verse 22 I wanted to share with you briefly. Isaiah 66 and verse 22. For just as the new heavens and the new earth I will endure before me, declares Yahweh, so your seed and your name will endure. You see that? For just as the new heavens and the new earth, this is in the future, which I will make will endure before me, declares Yahweh, so your seed and your name will endure. Israel's going to last forever. I mean, we see it in the book of the Revelation. Remember Revelation chapter 21 and verse 12, speaking about the New Jerusalem, the holy city, and he says it had a great high wall, it had 12 gates, and at those gates the 12 angels, and the names have been written on those gates, which are the names of the 12 tribes of Israel. Still in eternity future, the new heavens and the new earth still have something that designate Israel as a standing people. You see that? All right, so Abraham is the universal flow of that promised seed chart. You remember I showed you that before? Remember we have the pro-evangelium, right? The promise of Messiah who will come in Genesis 3:15. And then if you trace the genealogies, you see it flows from Adam to Seth and then to Noah. And of course, Noah has 3 sons, Shem, Ham, and Japheth. It goes to Shem. It comes down into Abraham's line. Abraham has several children by Keturah and by Hagar. And so it goes to Isaac. And then Isaac has 2. And it goes not to Esau, but to Jacob. And then it goes from Jacob to Judah, right? And you see that reference there in Genesis chapter 49. Genesis chapter 49 and verse 10. And you'll find that reference that says, the scepter shall not depart from Judah, nor the ruler's staff from between his feet until Shiloh comes, which is a messianic reference, and to him shall be the obedience of the people. So you can see that promised seed line goes all throughout the scripture, and it starts in that Genesis 3:15 flow chart there, right? And so at first we see God speaking to Abraham. We don't see it initially. We hear of it in chapter 11, verse 30. But if you go to Acts chapter 7, we're told there the same thing, the first time that God has confronted Abraham with this. I think it's verses 3 and 4, or 2 through 4 possibly. Let me just read 1 through 4. And the high priest said, are these things so? They're getting ready to question Stephen, right? And he said, hear me, brothers and fathers. The God of glory appeared to our father Abraham when he was in Mesopotamia, before he lived in Haran. And he said to him, leave your country, your relatives, and come into the land that I will show you. And he left the land of the Chaldeans and settled in Haran. From there, after his father died, God had him move to this country in which you are now living. So again, remember that that Abraham is not only in this promised seed, but these unconditional covenant promises will come through his line, Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, and of course probably one of the most important, I don't know if I would say this, but Dwight Pentecost said the most important chapter in the Bible. Anybody want to take a guess what it is? It's not in the New Testament. We're not dealing with Gentiles, right? He said it's the book of Genesis chapter 15, and we'll see that. But Genesis chapter 15 and verse 18, and you'll see why when I read this verse. It says, on that day Yahweh cut a covenant with Abraham, saying, to your seed I have given this land. And we'll get into those covenant promises as we move on. So Abraham, then through Isaac, then through Jacob, then through the seed line of the land, seed, and blessing promises will come to them. And Abraham is said to be the head of the nation of Israel, but not Jacob. Remember, it's Jacob whose name is changed to Israel. And we see that in Genesis 35:10. There's several other passages that denote that and tell how Abraham is the father of the Jews. We see it in passages we already read. We can see it in Matthew chapter 3 and verse 9, Luke 3:8. We can see it in John 8 and verse 39, and then Galatians chapter 3 and verse 7. The covenant promises that God makes to the Jews go through Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, whose name again is changed to Israel. We see that in Genesis 35:10 and chapter 32. So Jacob's name is changed to Israel, which means one who struggles against God. And of course, this is solely of grace. Look at Genesis chapter 25, I think it is. Look at Genesis 25, and then we'll flip over to the book of Hebrews, and you know this verse, but I want to kind of set this stage for you in this creation of Israel and why God is creating Israel. Genesis chapter 25, and again, verse 23. Because someone had told me earlier, some people see God in the Old Testament as the God of wrath, and then Jesus as the God of love in the New Testament. Well, the soul that sins, it shall die, right? The wages of sin is death. But how many people are born with a sin nature to where they go on sinning? All of them. So everybody should die at conception. But you see, God in His grace prolongs that and allows that. Genesis chapter 25 and verse 23. And Yahweh said to her, again, this is speaking to Rebekah and them, two nations are in your womb, and two people will be separated from your body. The one people shall be stronger than the other, and the older will serve the younger. Now that's interesting. God not only tells her that she's going to have two children, but that the older one is going to serve the younger one. And why is that odd that He would say that? Because back in that time, in that culture, the oldest one had the first rights. He had all that there was. Remember, Jacob had stole his birthright. He tricked him out of his inheritance, right? So listen to this sort of elaboration on this in Romans chapter 9, verses 11 through 13. Talking about these two, and let me just start at verse 9. For this is the word of promise, at this time I will come, and Sarah shall have a son. And not only this, but there was Rebekah also, when she had conceived twins by one man, our father Isaac. For though the twins were not born, and had done anything good or bad, so that the purpose of God according to His choice would stand, not because of works, but because of Him who calls, it was said to her, the older shall serve the younger, just as it is written, Jacob I've loved, but Esau I have hated. So it was according to God's choice. God chose Israel out of all the people of the earth, above all the other people of the earth that lived on the earth. From Shem, Ham, and Japheth, He picks Abraham out, and we'll get a little bit further into looking at Abraham as we go. So Jacob's name is changed to Israel, one who struggles with God. This would solely be of the grace of God in choosing them and creating them. And God has created all of us for the time that we live in right now, for a specific purpose, for a specific time. How many of you ever lived in another state? Or you do now live in another state, right? But you're here this morning, right? All of us are God has I'm going to watch what I say here. God is very specific in what He's been doing in creating all of us at the time that He's created us and bringing us here for this exact moment, right? So let's look at the choosing then of Israel. Go back to Deuteronomy chapter 7 and verse 6. Deuteronomy chapter 7 and verse 6. My computer's not working. Deuteronomy chapter 7, and we'll read several verses here. Deuteronomy chapter 7, and then reading verse 6, he says this: For you are a holy people to Yahweh your God. Yahweh your God has chosen you to be a people for his own treasured possession of all the peoples who are on the face of the earth. A treasured possession of all the people who are on the face of the earth. This is Israel. Israel is God's treasured people. I don't know if you've really thought about it or if you've read about it or heard about it. Look at chapter 14 and verse 12. I think he mentions it there as well, or maybe not. Chapter 14 and verse 12. But these are the, well, that's not right. 14 verse 2. Yeah, here we go. For you are a holy people to Yahweh your God, and Yahweh has chosen you to be a people for his treasured possession out of all the peoples who are on the face of the earth. Matter of fact, when he calls them, just to get ahead of ourselves, when he calls them out of Egypt and he calls them to himself, and we'll get to that, but in Exodus 19, he says he uses that same language in dealing with them. In chapter 19, verse 5, he says, So then, if you will indeed listen to my voice and keep my covenant, then you shall be my treasured possession among all peoples, for all the earth is mine. All the earth is mine. Let me give you one more verse, and then you can comment on the questions. Psalm 135. Psalm 135 and verse 4. Again, what I want you to see here is God has chosen Israel for a specific purpose. Right? He creates them for a specific purpose because of the universal idolatry. And now he's going to choose the nation themselves to be a special group of people to him above all the people that are upon the face of the earth. And verse 4 says, For Yahweh, Psalm 135, verse 4, For Yah has chosen Jacob for himself, Israel for his treasured possession. Israel is God's treasured possession. That's why in Zechariah he says, if you've touched me, or if you've touched Israel, you've touched the apple of my eye. Right? All right, Carrie? Anybody else? Yeah. Or the bride.
Right. If it didn't say that, would it be kind of incorrect in your mind to apply that language to the church today, specifically?
Well, I would think of it this way. God calls Israel his treasure, right? And he calls the church, which is Jew and Gentile right now, Ephesians 2:15, his bride. He obviously has a purpose for calling one his treasure and one his bride. One his wife and one his, Christ's bride to be. So I try not to mix stuff up too much, because you can get in trouble once you start mixing words and saying one thing means another. Listen to what, I'll address some other stuff in regard to that, but listen to Psalm 145, or maybe it's 147. Listen to Psalm 147, verses 19 and 20. I just want you to listen to this. Psalm 147, verses 19 and 20. Who declares his word to Jacob. Now, who's Jacob? Israel. His statutes and his judgments to Israel. Now, notice verse 20. He has not done so with any nation so as for his judgments, they have not known them. Praise Yah. God has communicated his word specifically to Israel. And now we have that. See that? So Israel serves a huge purpose in the hand of God. So again, we were talking about Abraham, we're talking about Isaac, we're talking about Jacob, we're talking about the tribes and going down through there. And Genesis chapter 17, verse 19, let me share with you just a couple passages that further what I'm trying to communicate to you without going overboard. Chapter 17 and verse 19, but God said, no, but Sarah, your wife, will bear you a son, and you shall call his name Isaac. I will establish my covenant, there's the word again, berith, with him for an everlasting covenant, and for his seed after him. So it's going to go to Isaac and his seed after him. And we'll get to seed and all that sort of terminology as well. Just flipping over to 35:12, talking about Jacob once again, chapter 35 and verse 12. He says, and the land which I gave to Abraham and Isaac, I will give to you, and I will give the land to your seed after you. You're going to possess this. And remember, we'll get to the covenant promises and what all that involved and what that pertained to. But in any case, it's going to be given to them. And then it goes to the 12 sons of Israel. Now, I think about it this way. In reading the Old Testament, of course, you're going to read the New Testament. Look at Matthew chapter, chapter 8 or chapter 19. That's a good one. Look at Matthew chapter 19. When you're familiar with this story, but now we're going to go ahead of time, right? This is before the church. This is still under the old covenant. In Matthew chapter 19, right, and verse 28, Matthew chapter 19, verse 28, verse 27 says, then Peter answered and said to him, behold, we have left everything and followed you. What will there be for us? And Jesus said to them, truly, I say to you, that you who have followed me in the regeneration, when the Son of Man will sit on his glorious throne, you also will sit upon thrones judging the 12 tribes of Israel. Now, when did that take place? Has that taken place? If it hasn't, it's got to. Unless you do something different with it and make it say something else. Look at Luke 22. Luke 22, again, the same text there. Luke 22, verses 28 through 30. Luke 22, of course, this is the question, who's the greatest and that sort of thing. But notice verses 28 through 30. Now you are those who have stood by me in my trials, and I grant you a kingdom just as my Father granted one to me, that you may eat and drink at my table in my kingdom, and you will sit on thrones judging the 12 tribes of Israel. You will sit on thrones judging people, the 12 tribes of Israel. Again, Israel's not gone. There's going to be a national Israel that's going to be judged by these 12 apostles. Now, what do you do with that? Is that literal or is that figurative? Or, I don't know. Let me just stop there. Does anybody have any thoughts on that, comments on that? You think that's past, that's happened somewhere, or what's your thought on that? Yeah. So it has to be when he sits on his throne. So, go ahead. So in Revelation 3:21, he says, Jesus is speaking, he said, he who overcomes, I will grant him to sit down with me on my throne, as I also overcame and am set down with my Father on his throne. You see? Right now, Christ is he was prophet, priest, and king. Right now, he's in his on earth, he was in his prophetic office where he would speak the truth. Now he's in his high priestly office in which he engages and intercedes for us to the Father, right? All right. So you see the promise then is to Abraham and to his seed. It's fulfilled in Isaac. These become the children of Israel, which becomes, of course, the chosen line. And, of course, you see here that God chooses who will be born, when they will be born, how they will be born, where they will live, where they will function. God has chosen all of those things. Let me share this as we get to the close. Look at Genesis 11:30. Just to remind you of some practical applications in regards to these truths here. Genesis chapter 11, verse 30. Sarah was barren and had no children. Sarah was barren and had no children. And they lived for quite a long time before she was said to have children. In chapter 17 and verse 21, it says, "But my covenant I will establish with Isaac, whom Sarah will bear to you at this season next year." Not only does he say, listen, your wife's not only going to have a child, she's going to have that child, Isaac, laughter, next year at this time. God is the one who opens and closes wombs. Right? Now, I know there's a lot of things that we can do. There's a lot of things that we can try to do. But when it's all said and done, it's God who opens the womb. Right? Genesis chapter 29, I think it is, in verse 31. You'll see this all throughout the scripture. Yeah. Yahweh saw that Leah was unloved, and he opened her womb. But Rachel was barren. Now, Rachel can't have any kids. Right? Rachel can't have any kids. Chapter 30 and verse 2. Jacob's anger burned against Rachel, and he said, "Am I in the place of God, who has withheld from you the fruit of the womb?" God is the one who gives birth. It's God who gives birth here. Psalm 139, verse 13 is a very interesting passage. I'm sure most of you know this. Psalm 139 and verse 13. Well, maybe I ought to get in Psalms. Psalm 139. Here we go. Psalm 139, verse 13. "For you formed my inward parts. You wove me in my mother's womb. And I will give thanks to you, for I am fearfully and wonderfully made." Are you born? Were you born? My best friend, when we were growing up, when I got saved earlier on, I was kind of, athletic and everything, just hung around a certain group of people. I didn't really hang around people who were physically handicapped in any way. And it just happened after I got saved and came back here. I met up with a guy who had cerebral palsy, who weighed probably about 280, 290. That was back when I was young, long time ago, before some of y'all were born. But I was just thinking about this. Gary was born with the cord wrapped around his neck. They took the cord off his neck. He was born. He had cerebral palsy. Both his brothers, cousins, all of them played ball. He couldn't play ball. But I can remember the one day he said, "You know what? If I could have played ball, I probably would have never got saved." And I said, "You know, I don't know, Gary. Maybe you're right. Maybe you're right." I have to tell a funny story about Gary. We used to go to meetings all the time, and we would be in there singing, and we started to sing this song, "I'll Fly Away." "I'll fly away." And he looked at my pastor, and my pastor kind of chuckled at him, and he chuckled, and he had sticks, and he weighed like 280, so he was a handful. Next thing you know, he flew away. Boom! Hit the ground. Everybody was shocked, and they got him up. And my pastor got up, and he made a joke about it. So the next time we were at a meeting, we were standing there, and we started singing that song again, "I'll fly away." And my pastor looked at Gary, and I looked at Gary, and we both started laughing. And sure enough, he hit the floor. He fell down again. I don't know why he did it. I just thought that was kind of funny that he did it both times. Anyway, let me just give you one more for your thought. First Samuel 1:5, and there's many other passages that we could look at and see. What I want you to see here is that God has chosen, He has created Israel for himself. He's going to choose them of all the peoples of the earth for a specific purpose. That purpose will go all into eternity. The things that we've not yet seen, at least that I've not yet experienced, and I know a lot of people who believe this go by the writings of a Jewish historian who is not Christian, the tribulational period, the war with Israel, with Russia and her 6 allies, the 75-day waiting period, the millennial kingdom. None of those things that I've seen in the Bible have we experienced. But look at 1 Samuel chapter 1 and verse 5. But to Hannah he would give a double portion, for he loved Hannah, but Yahweh had closed her womb. Yahweh had closed her womb, right? And so that's the thing that I want you to see. I don't know where you're at right now with the Lord. I don't know what God is calling you to do, what you think he wants you to do. But God has a choice that he makes in all of our lives. And that choice, I don't know if you know what that choice is between you and God or not, but that's the application I would give. Find out what it is that God has chosen you to do. What is in your heart that you want to do, that you desire to do, that you feel closest to God in doing? Find out what that is and pursue that, right? Any thoughts in closing? Yeah. When I get done with this first outline, then I'll put the first outline up.